Good afternoon and welcome to today's Info Security Magazine webinar. My name's Dan Raywood, I'm the editor of Info Security Magazine and I'll be moderating today's event in association with Infinigate. So for the next hour we're going to be looking at user on the move, the challenges of securing the borderless boundaries of your evolving mobile workforce. So just before I introduce you to today's panellists, our speakers today, just a few housekeeping points from me. We will have some polls running throughout the hour, so do look out for those and please do join in. Obviously gives us some ideas of what you're thinking and what we're speaking about. Do use the questions option, it's at the top of the screen there, just to ask your questions to our speakers directly, and any questions you have for us to speak the speaker, then obviously do direct them to them. We'll do our best to, at the end of the webinar, to put all those questions and get their answers for you. If you're on Twitter, the hashtag is #InfoSecWebinar, as you can see right in the centre of the screen there. So do join the discussion on social media. And finally, if you're a member of ISC Squared or ISACA, you get 1 CPE credit based on a minimum attendance of 50 minutes. That's 50 minutes. Once you have done that 50 minutes, you'll be able to download your certificate and send that in. So these are processed overnight, so you might not see it till tomorrow morning. So, without further ado, we're going to push on to introduce our speakers. So I'm Dan Raywood, as I said. Joining us today, speaking first, will be Chris Payne, who's Senior Technical Consultant at Infinigate. Later on, we'll be hearing from Dominic Trott, who's Research Manager at the European Security Practice at IDC. And later on, joining us for some questions directly is Andrew Hay, who is CISO at DataGravity. We were talking to him about mobile strategies and all the rest. So, without further ado, let's push on to our first poll question. So, quite simple, yes or no. How many of you work in organisations which allow personal devices to access corporate data? Yes. We can access corporate data on personal devices, or no, we can access. So pretty simple answer. If you can't figure that one out, then maybe skip it and come back to the later ones. But yeah, really interested to hear what you think to that. And with that, I am going to push over to Chris Payne for our first presentation. Chris, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Dan. Just going to move over to my first slide then. So yeah, I put these slides together really, and the first slide here is to highlight, not just from a graphical perspective, but it's really a play on the whole evolution of mankind and what we've seen, certainly in the mobile space, in probably the last 10 to 15 years. I would say certainly in my career, this has been quite a dominating part and something I've seen changing quite a lot. Start of my career,
Okay, looks like I think we might have lost Chris there. If anybody else can hear me, then do let me know. We're going to, maybe he's just lost the phone for a second, but sorry about that. We will hopefully get him back online as soon as we can. Just as I know, please do vote in that poll. How many of you work in organisations which allow personal devices to access corporate data? Yes or no? And hopefully he is coming back to us. Well, for the meantime then, let's maybe bring one of our speakers in case anybody else can hear me. Andrew, oh, pardon me, seems to be going.
So Dan, this is Andrew. I'm willing to believe that he believes we can still hear him.
Okay, I'm going to talk about Andrew. You and I apparently are the only ones who can hear each other. So I'm just going to drop him an email. These things do happen. So I'm going to just drop him and his marketing manager who are listening. I lost you on audio. So just while he is talking, Andrew, you are here for our questions on mobility. Before we get into some of the questions that we're going to ask you later on, let's just move that back a slide just to where he kicked off, so he knows where he came back in. The evolution of security, IT security for the mobile workforce, is that a bit of a kind of paradox that, you can't have security and mobility? Would you agree with that?
I think you can if managed properly. I see mobile, I don't tend to treat mobile devices as this newfangled device that is that much different than any other compute platform. It's just a compute platform that you can put in your pocket and take with you. And as a result, there's a lot of policies, procedures that you can align or extend from your existing infrastructure that can apply to mobile. But then there are the nuances of it being a smaller device, underpowered device that cannot have traditional antivirus, doesn't have host intrusion prevention. There are definitely smaller nuances on the device that require a new way of thinking. Especially, example for a laptop. If a laptop gets lost, the first thing we ask, hopefully, is does it have full disk encryption or were all your files encrypted? If the mobile device gets lost, usually the first question is, are all the pictures of my children okay? Or, can I still get pictures from my daughter's recital? Because a lot of people, even though they're bringing it in from home into the workplace, they don't see those devices as business platforms. They're personal platforms that can be used to help do business or do their daily job.
Here's a question for you, actually, and maybe just theoretically, do you think that people are still kind of quite happy to carry two devices around to be more secure? They carry the personal phone and the work deployed phone?
So speaking of personal experience, I think my wife would kill me if I had to carry around two devices, just because one is enough to keep a lot of my time occupied. From a security perspective, I don't know how much more secure having separate devices actually is, because there will always be some crossover. I'll call it contamination, because you may forward emails from one device to the other. You could be syncing using Dropbox or Box or one of the file sharing services. So there is going to be some tainting and contamination of both devices, unless you are, incredibly disciplined, which in today's busy world, I don't know how many people can say that they're that disciplined to use both devices and keep them completely separate.
Sure. I'm hearing from Chris that he is back. Chris, welcome back.
I am back. Sorry about that. I was on a fixed desk phone and I seem to have lost connection, but I've decided to dial in now my mobile. So very appropriate for today's webinar. I'm using my mobile now.
Absolutely. Well, Andrew, thanks for filling in. We'll come back to you later on. Chris, what I've done, just running back to your first slide, so I'll hand back to you.
Sure, thank you. Dan, sorry, where did I get to? Where did I cut off? Because I was rambling along before I was told I was cut off.
I think we were literally at the very start, so if you want to just start over from that slide there. Thank you.
All right, well, I apologize for the delay, guys. Okay, so my name's Chris Payne. I work for a company called Infinigate UK, and I'm a senior technical consultant. And on the slide I've got in front of you, of course, it's the title slide, but there's a graphic that I've put in there, which is supposed to be very akin to the sort of the evolution of man, but in terms of mobility and mobile devices. And what I really wanted to highlight from this diagram was the change, the fundamental change that we've seen in such a short period of time, probably upwards of 15 years now, in the devices that we use, the size of them, the more mobile they're becoming, and not just that, the more consumer-focused they're becoming as well. So, certainly at the beginning of my career and the beginning of most people's careers probably on this line, you would have noticed that if it wasn't a mainframe or a server or some kind of huge chunky thing on your desk, it was some kind of a desktop PC. And we then saw a movement into the laptop space. Originally, those laptops were quite clunky and large too, and you probably need a suitcase to move a lot of them around. But again, we've seen that progress, and some of the laptops we're seeing these days are extremely small. And then, consumerism really started to bite into the industry. iPhones and iPads and other tablets out there really started to take a hold. And there's a lot of households you can walk into today where their main device is an iPad or a tablet. They don't have a laptop or a PC anymore. It's really showing the change in the way that we interact with the world. And then finally, the buzzword of 2016 has to, of course, be wearable tech or IoT, and so I've had to include that on the slide too. And there's a real reason for it. There's obviously danger points, but still, the iWatch, you can access your email on it, so potentially your corporate email. It has a browser. You can access some of those services that you usually access whilst you're chairing your business. So it is becoming a device that you use to consume data and interact with the services at work. So that's the evolution that we see. Now, I also found a really interesting quote online a couple of weeks ago that I wanted to share with you guys. And again, I think it really highlights why mobile and why security in mobility is really pertinent. And this is something I found that was published in 2014, and that's that in a survey run by Kinsey, they actually found that 2/3 of CIOs, and the quote's actually larger, I had to cut it down to fit it on the screen, but IT practitioners, security analysts all believe that mobility will have a bigger impact on their business than the internet did in the 1990s. Now that's a really bold claim, and it may be that some people don't agree with that, and it obviously depends on how much mobile has a touch in your organization. But to even dare to compare it to the advent of the internet and its impact on business means that mobility is a really interesting and important field within our industries. Now, in order to understand, I think, where to go with mobility and mobile security and where it's developing, we have to really understand what the past looks like. And of course, this is a very familiar view to a lot of people. I think that with hindsight, the network admin of yesteryear had it quite easy, and that's with a lot of hindsight there, because we probably all worked in those roles. But it was a very simplistic world. We had the inside of the network and the outside of the network, and the aim and the goal was just to prevent the outside getting in, but allowing, you know, things like a little bit of internet surfing, a little bit of email communication. But that was the primary reason for a network admin, was to maintain that separation and that segregation. And as security practitioners, our roles is quite simple. Make that perimeter stronger and bigger. Build that wall up as high as we possibly can to keep the bad guys out. It was great when we think about it because it was so simple. But things have changed, and they changed fundamentally. And now what we see is perimeters are porous. Those devices are no longer fixed on the desk. There's not a ball and chain aspect to these devices anymore. They are on the move. They can potentially be anywhere. And paired with the internet, devices literally can be anywhere in the world. So we see this aspect now where the perimeter is not really a perimeter anymore. Things can move in and out. Now, where did that come from? Well, I think throughout my career, I've seen it come from three different places. Firstly, consumerism, and we can certainly point back to tablets and PDAs and smartphones as a real key driver for consumerism invading our space. And one of the things I think was key to me to realize this change taking place was probably about 7 years ago, when the iPad was becoming popular. I think there was a period where everybody got an iPad over Christmas. Apple obviously enjoyed that quite a lot. And I remember coming back from a Christmas break and having most of the senior management team coming to me saying, I got this for Christmas and I want to get my email on it. And we just were not prepared for that type of scenario because we hadn't had any aspect of mobility in our networks at that point. And we just suddenly were being asked by the people that paid our wages that we need to get something working immediately. So there was a rush. Consumers effectively drove that change. Also finance. I think the financial crash of 2008 really drove a lot of businesses towards wanting to embrace mobility for financial reasons. They didn't want the large offices that they once had, or they wanted to have people working on a part-time basis. The term hot desking became something that I think I got tired of hearing after a while once the 2008 crash happened. And again, that really drove us towards aspects of mobility that we see today. And the final one, which really lends itself back to expectation, I think, is the consumerism and expectation link. And what I mean by that is, as users have become more and more familiar with using mobile devices and IT in general, we've started to demand more and more mobility from the devices that we're using. For example, if you go into a restaurant or an airport or anywhere where there's a large public gathering these days and there's not free public Wi-Fi, it seems pretty archaic. Our expectations of how we want to interact with data and the world really, again, is driving that industry. Now, what we have to do, though, is put an IT spin on this. Yes, it's great that our world has become more mobile and everything's accessible, but what implication does that have on IT security and practitioners such as ourselves? Firstly, where is your sensitive data? Once the devices start to move around and outside of your perimeter, the potential for data to move outside of your boundary exists as well. Think about also cloud services. Cloud services, I think, it's still a very big driver today, but 2015, I can't think of a customer that I spoke to that wasn't thinking about some kind of aspect of cloud implementation. Now, you may not have personal data or sensitive data on the devices that are moving around, but those devices that are moving around are certainly accessing cloud instances that potentially contain sensitive data as well. So it's not always just about the device, it's also about what's being accessed by that device. In effect, the user is driving this, and the user on the move is what's changing our fundamental view of how we protect data. Now, we actually ran a survey, I think it was about 3 months ago now. We got the results back in. We've been doing a lot of analysis over that. There's a huge amount of data to go through. And one of the really stark things that came out of that was that we found that over 1/3 of our surveyed respondents had actually reported that in the last 2 years, they had suffered some kind of mobile breach. Now, it could be the handsets had been breached or physically stolen. It could be that the communications between them had been snooped on and intercepted. We didn't go into that much detail. But just to suggest that 1/3 of organizations had suffered a breach within the last 3 years in this particular space is huge in itself. So what we need to do is we need to reset what we know about the idea of fixed networks with inside and outside, porous networks with devices moving between the two, and also how we consider the idea of protecting the data that these devices are consuming. And we have to not abandon the idea of a network perimeter because it's still functional, but we also have to start to build bubbles around those devices that are moving in and out of the network as well. They consume and hold data in the same way, essentially, as what's inside the network, and so a boundary needs to be created around those devices in a similar way to which we've created around the network too. So how do we do this? And I think what we can do is we can leverage something that we're all quite familiar with. If anyone on the call is assist or has done any kind of academic training or education around IT security, there's 3 key principles, 3 key levers to data that we can actually leverage and start to protect as aspects within our security policies. And don't forget, as we change our habits, cyber criminals change their habits too. So that quote that I just read to you about 1/3 of attacks taking place, well, the cyber criminals have noticed our change in behavior and they're changing their tactics too. They're following us. It is a cat and mouse game effectively. So these 3 levers can also be considered as interception points for attackers too, and we need to consider this idea. So data at rest, data in motion, and data in use. And anybody that's not familiar with these terms, of course, what we're talking about here is data being stored, data being communicated, so emails or VPN connections, whatever it happens to be. And of course, data in use is anything that's going through a process at that time. So it could be some kind of an automation system that's processing data, a form that's being processed, something like that, but it's data being consumed either by a user or an automated process at that particular time. We need to look at those 3 key areas. Now, before I talk about how we can protect those areas, I want to pick up on 3 recent news articles that I actually found, which really highlight that cyber criminals are looking at these areas, and these are areas which should be looked at in a bit more detail by IT practitioners. And I'll take a look at those now. So the first one, data at rest. Anybody on the call that is a keen watcher of the news probably would have seen these 3 pop up, but the first one is very recently, I think it was June 8th, I might be slightly wrong on that, but it's certainly early June of this year, we actually heard about a Washington Redskins trainer, an NFL team that is. He'd left a laptop in his car in a parking lot, and that car had been broken into and the laptop had been stolen. And actually what subsequently came out of that was the laptop contained 13 years of NFL player medical exam results. 13 years, and the data was unencrypted, so it was freely available to the person who had actually taken that laptop. That's incredible. Breaks a lot of laws in the UK and also some of the laws that are coming out in the future. Now, one of the things I've also put on this list here is great. The laptop was stolen. It proves my point. That's fantastic. But I also found at the bottom of the article something that I thought was quite a dangerous thing, and it really highlights why we need to do a lot of research into these areas to understand the true problems and the true natures of the solutions. A very well-known vendor out there, who I'm not going to name, unfortunately, for anybody that's hanging on the end of the call for that, actually put a recommendation at the end of the article. And they said this wouldn't have happened if there was 2FA, two-factor authentication prompts on the laptop. Now, that is incorrect. I can definitely tell you that on the call today. My recommendation in this particular scenario will be coming up in 2 more slides, but that's wrong. And I was actually quite surprised to see a major player in that space say something like that. That's data at rest. That's a case in which we've seen data at rest as a lead being attacked by cyber attack. Also, data in motion. This is not the older example, but Trend Micro actually conducted a piece of research, and there's been a couple of other security vendors out there as well that have actually conducted similar research in the past. They purchased a 4G-enabled smartphone, just a basic one, which I think you can buy from around £150 these days. They then downloaded an app from the Google Android App Play Store, and they set it up as a wireless hotspot in the City of London. Gave it a name with a kind of a cafe-ish SSID name on it, so it looked like you were connecting to Costa or Starbucks or something like that, something that you would consider to be relatively trustworthy, I guess. At least there's a logo and a color behind it. And they just let people join it. They gave them access to the internet, so it seemed legitimate. And they started harvesting data using the app that they downloaded. An app that's freely available for you to download today on the Google App Store. It's free. It's absolutely free. And they harvested authentication information, communications, emails, attachments, everything that was being moved across that network. They were actually taking back and analyzing later on. Now, that's actually known as an evil twin attack, and it's not something that's brand new in the industry. But it just highlights that piece about data in motion being quite vulnerable. Often join what we're not really aware of. Scroll all the way down to the terms and conditions, get to the bottom, pick it, press OK, and we get through to the functionality and we get our emails back. And that, again, is leveraged quite often by cyber criminals as a technique for snooping on what we're doing and gaining some access. And the final one I've got here to kind of highlight data in use, I think it's probably my favorite of all three, and that is that, again, early June this year, ISIS, Islamic State, actually put out a notification to its members to tell them not to download the AMAC agency app. Now, if any of you don't know what that is, it's the ISIS equivalent of the BBC News app. It's a way that they communicate their messaging across all of their followers. They believed that their app had actually been compromised and it was snooping on their users, and they recommended that their users no longer download or use that app. And the reason why I think that's a great example to use is because it goes to show that this is not a problem that just you and I suffer from. This is actually a problem that, you know, what we consider to be the bad guys suffer from too. So this can be turned around in many different ways. Now, as a security consultant, it's really important in my role not just to point out the problems, but to also point out what the potential solutions can be. And that's why I've wanted to include this slide at the end. Now, again, I'm following it through from the data at rest, data and data at use. And I think it's, I mentioned before that security vendor recommends FA authentication for protecting data at rest. And I mentioned that I believe it's a comprehensive solution. And this is why I believe that. I think you need to pair device encryption. 2FA authentication, great. It allows you to obfuscate a password or obfuscate a third prompt so that it can't be guessed or reverse engineered or shoulder surfed or any of those nice terms that are out there. But as you know, you can take a laptop, you can take the hard drive out of it, and you can connect it to another device with a similar operating system and browse Windows operating system. You don't necessarily need to be able to bypass the authentication prompts. Not just that, we do also have the ability to download boot disks. Boot disks, even Windows, Apples themselves supply a boot disk, which allows you to get access into resetting things like administration passwords. So 2FA alone is not really the solution in here. But if you full disk encrypt the device too, with a prompt for 2FA to unlock that encryption, what you do is you build a comprehensive solution. The hard drive can't just be stolen and looked at because there's going to be a prompt for 2FA there that's been obfuscated. And also, at the same time, we're protecting the notion of shoulder surfing, password guessing, things like that, because of the fact that that 2FA token is constantly changing. So for me, you know, recommending just one side of the coin is a bad piece of practice. But I think together those two solutions there really do help with the data. It plays to the idea of communication snooping. And what I put here is secure tunnels and VPNs. And it seems like an old idea, but consider this. You know, we have to respect the fact that users' expectations are they want to join Wi-Fi hotspots. And we really are going to lose the fight if we really want to try and press our users to check every single Wi-Fi hotspot. We're just not going to do it. So what we can do is, in a situation where we have a dirty path, if you can think about it in that way, we can actually just provide a clean route. So an encrypted tunnel from device to whatever we are consuming at that point or whatever we're connecting to, which we traverse communications on. That means everything that we are communicating is secure, but everything around it that is compromisable. The other thing that I think is really important is to use encrypted protocols. I don't think I'm really talking about anything new here, but you'd be surprised today, a lot of customer sites that I go to where they're still using FTP, where the password is sent in clear text, or they're still using things like HTTP forms where they're entering things like passwords. something that is happening today and really shouldn't. And again, protecting those aspects of the communication is going to go a long way to preventing the snooping that's taking place. And the third one, the one, I guess, which targets ISIS, if anyone's on the call wants to give some recommendation to ISIS, here it is. But the integrity of the applications that you're using, the integrity of the services that you're using, you must check them. And the ability for your users to those applications need to be moderated.
Yeah, looks like we're struggling with Chris's audio there still. So, but unfortunately, I'm going to give him just 1 second just to come back. And I think he was almost done though. So I think we're kind of getting the main point there about the three security stages that he is trying to address. I'm going to give him just 1 second. What I'm going to do actually, just while we wait for Chris to return, I think it doesn't look like he is going to be joining us again. I think he might have lost his connection. So I think we're going to terminate his session. He was literally done, and I'm going to push on to our second poll question. So I'm going to finish the first poll there, and the second poll then, as you can see on the screen, what is the bigger concern for your business? Personally owned mobile devices, we talked with Andrew just at the start there about owning 2 devices, open internet access on desktops, Internet of Things connected devices. I literally did do an air quote there as I'm sitting here and listening to you. And or other. If you have an other thing that's bigger concern, do let us know through the questions function. Just give us a comment there. We'll read those out later on. Some of the comments that you've made about the bigger concern. So while hopefully Chris does return, I'm going to hand over to our second speaker today, who hopefully will have a bit more success with his phone, and that's Dominic Trott, who's research manager for the European Security Practice at IDC. Dominic, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Dan, and hopefully you can all hear me, in which case I wish you all a good afternoon, and so it's a pleasure to be able to speak with you today. So yeah, my name's Dominic Trott, Research Manager in IDC's European Security Research Practice. And for those of you that may not be familiar with IDC, we're one of the world's leading IT market analyst firms. Okay, so seeing as I represent IDC, you'll likely be expecting some kind of market data from me. After all, as this slide shows, data is our middle name. IDC stands for International Data Corporation. So let's start with the findings from our Western European survey looking at mobility priorities. This slide draws on a survey that engaged with approximately 1,000 CIOs across Western Europe in order to try and understand their priorities in mobility. And here we're looking at the mobility technologies that they think are most critical in supporting a mobile workforce. The light blue bars indicate where this number stood for each of the technologies you can see there in H2 2014, and the dark blue gives the same indication for H2 2015. So this is an annual survey, so we conduct it on a recurring basis. And without going too deep into all the details here, for me there's a clear message anyway. Security is the theme that's identified by most CIOs as their top priority for mobility, and this lead is growing as we move further along in the annual recurrence of our study. Moving on then, my next slide here compares the size of the Western European total security software market with its mobile security equivalent, so a sub-segment within it. This is measured in millions of dollars and covers the period running from 2015, which obviously is the most recent full year where published information is available, through to 2020. So what does the forecast here show us? Well, we can see that both markets are growing in volume throughout the forecast period. But we can also very clearly see that mobile security, in the dark blue on the chart, is a small segment of the total security software market, which is in light blue. In fact, in 2015, this was just over 7%. So while total security software was a $5 billion market in Western Europe in 2015, mobile security was just over 370 million, according to our forecast. Now, there's a few key reasons behind this. So, first of all, mobile security is just one piece of the security puzzle that enterprises are faced with. If we look at mobile devices as a form factor, they're just one type of device that exists within the enterprise. So there's still a strong reliance on the desktop. There's the fact that the data center very much remains the ship upon which enterprise technology sails, so servers are also critical. That's before we even account for things like the cloud, physical networks, security appliances, so on and so forth. Now, secondly, is a question of maturity. So while overall security software is far from the poster child of software maturity, it's ahead of the mobile security segment. So while solutions such as antivirus predate the mobile age, mobile security, by definition, has been in place for less time. And also, while it might be hard to see from this chart, another important point is that mobile security software growth is outpacing the security software market as a whole. So while mobile security software was 7% of the market in 2015, we expect it to approach 10% by 2020. To show this trend much more clearly, this next slide shows the level of growth that we're expecting to see each year for the two markets across our forecast period. So total security software, again shown in light blue, is expected to grow by nearly 9% from 2015 to 2016, the level of growth gradually decelerating to around 6% in 2020. And this gives us a compound annual growth rate, or CAGR, of around 7% for this 2015 to 2020 period. As we can see from the dark blue line, the growth trajectory is very different for enterprise mobile security software. Although we expect mobile growth to come closer in line with the overall market by 2020, albeit still above it, at present the market's growing over 20%. For the forecast period as a whole, we expect mobility to post a CAGR of around about 13%. Now, bringing this into broader context, when you consider that other segments of the software market would kill for growth level that security is showing, we can see that mobile security is a particularly dynamic segment. So now that we've looked at the what in terms of IDC's expectation for market size and growth, I'd like to turn the attention to the rest of the presentation from me onto the why. So I'm going to set out some of the key drivers and expectations that we at IDC see as shaping the market forecast that I just shared with you. So first up, I want to share with you IDC's view of the three meta trends that we see driving the security market as a whole. So these are: one, the evolving threat landscape; two, the growing burden of regulatory reform; and three, the mounting wave of digital transformation that we see in the enterprise. So starting off with the threat landscape, in shorthand, we can say that more bad things are happening to more people more of the time. And what's more, the threat actors know their market increasingly well, operate increasingly professionally, and are able to collaborate highly effectively. And when we combine this with the rise of the insider threat, both malicious, so sort of a Snowden-type disgruntled employee with privileged access, but also unwitting, pointing to the ease with which credentials can be compromised, it just goes to show how important or how large the challenge is. Moving on to the regulatory challenge, the top agenda item here is the EU's upcoming General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, which focuses on the security of EU citizens' personal data. There are three key elements I'd like to raise here. First of all, many organisations don't actually know what data they hold, let alone where it is or what's being done to secure it. What's more, the mandatory breach notifications that are coming in under the new law, we're likely going to see a far greater number of incidents becoming public and a greater degree of public scrutiny on breaches. And there's little in the way of specific guidance in terms of how organisations ought to respond to GDPR, other than they must take a risk-based approach and that it must be done with regard to state-of-the-art technology, whatever that means. Although the regulation does point towards technologies such as obfuscation, encryption, data loss prevention, so on and so forth, it is perhaps intentionally vague, waiting for organisations to be able to stand up in court and say why the approach that they've taken is state-of-the-art and why it's risk-based in terms of delivering the level of security it ought to. The factor that initially drove many company boards to prick up their ears on hearing of GDPR, the second of the three key points I talked about, is the fact that companies are liable for fines of up to 4% of global revenue for those found to be in egregious breach of the regulation. However, IDC expects that the potential reputational damage that organisations face following a breach could be even more significant than the fines. Third of these key points I wanted to talk about here is the extraterritorial nature of the regulation. This is to say that it doesn't matter where a company is headquartered or whether or not it has physical operations within the EU. Quite simply, if an organisation holds EU citizens' personal data, they're on the hook under the terms of the GDPR. And this is something that my colleagues and I have been trying to get our peers and customers in the US to understand. But actually, following the recent political developments here in the UK, it's become somewhat closer to home than we'd expected to be talking about. Anyway, so finally for this slide, let's come on to the topic of digital transformation. And this has caused the comfort blanket of a secure perimeter to erode, something that Chris talked about a bit earlier. We would say that cloud and mobility in particular mean that this perimeter is gone under traditional models. After all, with applications and data now extending beyond the network onto third-party cloud platforms and even personal devices, network security can no longer be the answer in and of itself, although again, to underline what Chris said, we can't abdicate that kind of model. It's still an important part just of a broader picture. The challenge here is that while the typical response of security professionals might be to control or even prevent digital transformation, the business is being driven to adopt it at ever stronger levels as a means of surviving competition. Ooh. So following on from the digital transformation point on the previous slide, I just wanted to raise a few key points around mobility in particular. So this slide here it expresses digital transformation through the lens of what IDC terms the third platform of technology. So for those of you on the line who are not familiar with this analogy, we think about the first platform as the mainframe era, computers the size of buildings, reserved for the very largest and richest organisations. Second platform then is the PC era, when computing started to become a bit more personalised, but still remained largely within a corporate context. The third platform is the era that we are in now, where technology is rooted around the needs of the individual, becoming highly focused on ease of use and consumerisation. And we frame this around what we call the four key pillars of the third platform, which are big data analytics, cloud, mobility, and social business. And we can draw a few key characteristics from the mobility pillar that have some significant implications for security. First, with mobile devices becoming increasingly ubiquitous, the attack surface that an organisation projects, so the number of potential vectors through which it can be attacked, increases accordingly. Second, with mobile devices taking corporate apps and data outside the network, the idea of a secure perimeter based around the network, hiding behind the firewall, is gone. Finally, there's the challenge of appification. So while this is great from a usability and a convenience perspective, it does also raise some challenges. In particular, we see that there's a deprofessionalisation of application development which is going on. So to stress the point, mobile apps are being developed by six-year-olds in primary school, which is great, but we have to wonder if security is going to be a key concern for a six-year-old mobile app developer. Okay, so for this section of the presentation, I wanted to highlight a few key outcomes for enterprise mobile security that are arising from the drivers that I've just explored. So if we take the first point here, while the mobile workforce is already strong, IDC expects this to intensify. In fact, our research indicates that mobile workers will go beyond about 40% of the Western European workforce in 2016 and reach over 70% by 2020. While this is allowing gains in terms of things like productivity and collaboration, it does also contribute to the growing attack surface of enterprises. Second point here, referring to the piecemeal expansion of mobile security software that we've seen, with typically featuring point solutions selected on a best-of-breed basis. This is resulting in highly fragmented environments that don't necessarily integrate very well. Buyer needs are changing as a result of this, placing a growing emphasis on governance, risk management, and these kind of things that can help to drive visibility across the overall mobile security environment. It also spurs interest in integration to tie together disparate solutions. And also we're seeing a growing interest in mobility managed services as a means of almost handing the complexity to a third party or asking them to take away the pain. In reaction to these fragmented environments, with security in fact started being seen as an inhibitor rather than making life easier and better for users, vendors are actually starting to turn this into an opportunity now. So they're developing what we at IDC are calling unified digital workspace platforms that combine things like security, identity, and cloud infrastructure through a single integrated solution. And increasingly, enterprise managed mobility is being viewed as one and the same as mobile enterprise security. And it's no surprise that we see vendors making acquisitions across both of these market segments and more, in fact. So finally, here's a few points that I see driving the capability and functionality of enterprise mobile security software as a result of all these factors that we've gone over. So with mobility contributing to the deperimeterization of security with regards to their network at least, a new perimeter is being formed around data and identity. So we heard earlier about the bubbles that are being formed around mobile devices. That's the same kind of concept. Mobility does actually have a pretty key role to play here, accelerated by some of the points I talked about around GDPR actually. And we're seeing that the ability to control and monitor data movement and access through things like mobile identity and access management and what we call mobile information protection and control, so that's things like encryption and DLP. These kind of solutions can help enterprises to get a grip on the challenge. Second, the notions of context and behaviour are helping to foster more proactive approaches towards security. So mobile security, again, is a pretty key frontier where authentication, mobility management can help us to understand who's seeking access to what information, whether their role should allow them to do so, and whether they need or possess a managed device in order to do so. Last, but by no means least, there's the risk that mobile security becomes something that makes it harder rather than easier for the mobile workforce to do their jobs. In the age-old battle of usability and security, the rise of digital transformation is adding to this challenge significantly. But, for example, in tandem with analytics technology, understanding context and behaviour, as I explained a minute ago, we can start to automate authentication and mobile security management. So in this way, while the strength of security doesn't let up, the process perhaps can start to become separated for the user. It's in the background for them. So it's still going on, but it doesn't impede their ability to do their job and reacts according to their sort of individual nature, if you like, and just really helping to ease their use of mobile workspaces. So that's the end of the part from me. Thank you for listening, and let me pass on to the next section. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Dominic. Thanks very much for your presentation. And we are going to move straight over to Andrew Hay, who is CISO at DataGravity. In his previous life, Andrew also worked as an analyst and worked for a vendor, so I hope you've seen quite a lot of this industry. And obviously we heard from you earlier on with our little mobile problems, but we talked earlier on about mobility and owning two devices, Andrew. And one thing I was going to ask you about was, in terms of securing the mobile workforce, is this something that you find quite good kind of buy-in for? Are people kind of keen for security to be part of their lifestyle?
So I think from a business perspective, the individuals or the groups in charge of securing the business are very concerned about security and privacy and regulatory compliance. But the individuals that are using the phones and the mobile devices, they're less concerned about security and compliance and far more concerned about the privacy of their actions and the data stored on the devices themselves. So I think a lot of them just like cloud, inherently believe that the devices are secured on their behalf, and that's just not the case.
Sure, sure. Yeah, a certain amount of buy-in, actually. This leads to my next question, actually. What tactics do you think work in terms of getting a buy-in from employees? Is it, treat everything as securely as you would at home? Well, not everyone lives securely at home, what kind of things do you think work to get people actually thinking, this is something I want to participate in?
Well, so there's two ways to do it. You can either have the carrot or the stick approach, where in the carrot approach you're explaining the possible threats and the challenges with data that is residing on a mobile device or moving from the company to a mobile device and back again. And it's more of an education play. You're showing them how they can just participate in the security of the organization. So you're making them really align their line of thinking with the way the business sees security and the devices. The other way is, unfortunately, what we see a lot of, especially on big vendor conferences, where it's trying to scare the individual into submission by saying, there are all these attacks, China is going to get you, et cetera, et cetera. And that works for some. A lot of people have become somewhat numb to that approach. I think that the education method is far superior because you're getting that emotional buy-in from that individual and helping them see the light, for lack of a better term.
Sure, sure. And just actually flip that question on the other side then. In terms of getting the board to approve a mobility program, is that kind of a tricky thing to achieve? Do they see the benefits in having a secure workforce, or is it more expense for them?
Well, see, that's the problem. And just based on personal experience working at a bank, working at a university, unless the organization has been burned once, or at least once, it's harder to get that buy-in without going the extra distance to set up the use cases, to explain to them, take the time to explain to them the possible outcomes. If they can't really see the forest for the trees and can't understand why would someone target us? So the bank in Bermuda, for example, I was told that, we don't need to upgrade our security controls because we're on an island in the middle of the Atlantic and we don't have anything that they would want. Okay, well, you're a bank and you have money and people like money, so that's kind of the argument there. But for a mobile device, it's hard to, and even a mobile policy, it's very hard to convince the management and executive team that something may happen. So the best approach I have come up with is to look at adjacent organizations. So if you're in financial services, start looking at other financial services organizations and figure out who their champions for their mobile program was or is, and see if you can get them to come over for lunch or give a presentation to your executives on why it's important based on what they've seen. It may require a non-disclosure agreement, which is fine, but if you can point to another company in your industry or an adjacent industry, it hits home a lot harder than if you're in financial services and you say, hey, look, Sony Pictures has been attacked by, here's my air quotes of North Korea. If I'm a financial services organization in the UK or in Europe, I don't care because I don't make movies.
Yes. Mm-hmm. That's a very, very good point, actually. Yeah, it's air quotes definitely there, and we're still willing to get a bit more on that story as far as I can recall. But yeah, absolutely. It's about getting maybe the the business cares about what they're doing, actually what they're trying to protect, then obviously that's seen as a way in. So I'm just going to actually wrap up I'm going to leave the second vote running just for a couple of minutes more and just get the results of our first poll. So we asked, how many of you work in organisations which allow personal devices to access corporate data? Kind of pretty even split actually. 56% say we can access corporate data on personal devices. 44% said no, we cannot access corporate data on personal devices. So 56 say yes, 44% say no. Let's just stick with you for a minute, Andrew. Then, so do you think this is kind of a modern trend? Really, more people are kind of seeing the whole BYOD. I know it's something we've been talking about for sort of 5-6 years now, but they're actually seeing this as actually a very viable option now.
I think I think it's just not a necessary evil, but BYOD came in a wave, almost like, the Mongol hordes where they just showed up and said, hello, we're here. So it's not as if you can say, okay, well, you can't be here anymore. It's how do we tolerate and how do we allow people to use these devices in the organization so that we don't adversely affect their work-life balance, and how can we make them successful? So I think it's a lot of really falling on your sword from the business side to say, okay, we understand you want to use these devices, that's fine. It's not a fight that we're going to go to the mat on.
Sure. We are just going to wrap up the second poll, and I will come back to the results of that in just 1 second. Before we move to the Q&A, I'm going to move back to Q&A. I'm just actually going to ask this third and final poll question, actually. Which of these do you intend to employ first to deal with the problem of remote workers? Encryption, two-factor authentication, secure file, signature, or mobile device management? Obviously, kind of covered all four today, so do let us know that. So we're just going to move back, actually, to the Q&A. If you have any questions in the last kind of 5 to 10 minutes for any of our speakers today, please do get in touch. Chris, I'm hoping you're with us, because we want to just, first of all, make sure when you got cut off from us earlier on that there were no final thoughts that you would hope to kind of pass over to us. And I see if Chris is actually with us or not. He is having some problems today, so I'm gonna let him come back to me hopefully before the end of the webinar to ask him about wearable tech, actually. So maybe Dominic, if you're still with us, I'm hoping I'm not just me talking to myself here. Dominic, if you're still with us, we're going to ask about wearable technology. I mean, first of all, do you think that wearable technology is kind of being classified as mobility these days?
Yes. It's a connected device that is mobile. So, and as was pointed out earlier, for example, you can access your email from your iWatch or what have you. Other brands are available. So yes, I think we need to classify it as part of the environment. Otherwise, it's going to leave potential gaps. People are going to use these things if they see it as being useful and more convenient. Therefore, you can't turn a blind eye to it.
Yeah, sure. Andrew, maybe just from your perspective then, I mean, we're not really talking about IoT so much there compared to more mobility, but is that one way around the security of these kind of personal devices actually, is actually if you've already achieved it for your mobile devices, or maybe you're in the process of achieving it for mobile devices, trying to do it for IoT is a sort of similar kind of battle, really?
So I think that the scope for IoT devices in general in a broad classification is far more difficult than BYOD. It's Internet of Things is still relatively new, and then the security sector associated with IoT is even more recent, and there's so few players that don't really have a good track record or a long-standing track record of success. So if you decide that from a mandate perspective, you're going to say, okay, now we need to apply the exact same scrutiny we apply to BYOD devices to IoT devices, that's quite a big undertaking.
Great, good points there. So we're going to visit the second poll result, which I just wrapped up a second ago. What is the bigger concern for your business? Two highest were open internet access on desktops of 35%, personally owned mobile devices, we've covered that quite a lot, say 32%, 19% IoT, 13% said other, and you haven't chosen anybody to tell us what those other ones are, so I should only a few of you actually voted in that. But interesting, open internet access, I guess, then you talked about non-restrictions on any websites at all is slightly more of a concern, but 32%. Chris, have you managed to rejoin us at all?
I have, yeah. I've been listening for a couple of minutes, actually.
Oh,
while I'm still on the call, I'll answer that for you, that point. Open access to the internet from any device is scary. It really is. We know some of the dangers that are out there on the internet, and frankly, we should be a bit more better behaved when it comes to security than having open internet access. There's definitely a struggle in the industry. We are touching on it in many different conversations on the call today. Mobile devices, once they step outside of that perimeter and there's no longer a proxy server, what do you do? Wearable tech, which sometimes doesn't even have the ability to introduce things like proxying or any security aspects in some cases. These are definite challenges. I think if we take one step back and we kind of think about what the actual danger is and why we need some action here, a lot of mobile devices, particularly when you look at things like the Android operating system, the Apple operating system, and some of these newer devices that are appearing on the IoT market, they generally don't have a lot, at least in the beginning, a lot of scope for security, as was mentioned on the call. Now, one of the other things that's quite dangerous is privilege level. Most of these devices have been created with the consumer in focus. And as a result of that, the consumer or the person who owns the device tends to have administrative access, or at least whatever is deemed to be root access on that particular device. Now, anybody on this call in the security space will know that's a particular point of danger, because when an attacker gains access to a device that has privilege level, they're able to pretty much do whatever they want. So having open access to the internet is just really the start of things. Open access to the internet and open access to the device is really a combination for disaster.
Yeah, I agree with that. So we're just going to actually just finish off then with the final poll, which we've just had open there. We're going to just wrap that up there, and thank you everyone for voting. Which of these do you intend to deploy first to deal with the problem of remote workers? 41% encryption. 0 actually, secure file sync and share. Maybe that's something that's not so hot anymore. 37% 2FA, 22% MDM, 41% encryption. Chris, let's maybe just come back to you on that final point. So that's what people plan to, it's a very open term. It could be VPN, it could be secure email, it could be anything really. But yeah, it's overarching term. Encryption is the most popular way to deal with, get them people secure.
Yeah, and I think the good news is that despite the quality of my communications today, it seems that people have been watching my slides, because they were two recommendations that I made: encryption and two-factor authentication. So certainly glad to see that appearing on the poll at the top. Encryption is always going to have a lot of focus. It's probably the easiest thing you can do. Most mobile platforms today have some kind of feature, and inclusive for free, generally a feature for at least on the mobile platform. Windows devices, laptops, things like that. There's lots of commercial products out there with strong encryption mechanisms. And of course, we would always recommend taking the human factor out of these situations, which is, in this case, the password which unlocks that encryption, and actually replacing it with something that we can actually obfuscate. So again, that's 2FA. We're really pleased to see those two at the top, but of course, all three options are very good and valid options.
Definitely so. Great stuff. Well, thanks everybody for listening in today. Sorry I didn't get a bit more interaction, but we're going to come back, round things up right now. And so we'd love to thank Infinigate for their sponsorship of today's webinar, and also, of course, our guest speakers today, Dominic Trott and Andrew Hay. For details on upcoming InfoSecurity Magazine webinars, visit the website www.infosecurity-magazine.com. We've got 2 other webinars coming up later on in July, reflecting the area of GDPR. So more encryption there for you, actually, some more interest if you're interested in data protection. A recording of this webinar will also be available online via the InfoSecurity webinar very shortly. Before you leave, please do rate the webinar. Tell us what you like and what you'd like to hear from us in future. So with that, thanks everybody for listening, and thanks very much for attending, and we'll see you next time.